You ever notice how someone can act cold, distant, unavailable, and yet somehow everything in their behavior is screaming, "Please don't leave me"? That's because the loudest cry for love is not always spoken with words. Sometimes it's hidden inside silence, inside hesitation, inside someone pulling away the moment they start feeling too much. And if you don't understand this pattern, you'll misread fear as rejection, distance as disinterest, and self-protection as a lack of love. But today, you're going to understand what's really happening beneath the surface, and it will completely change the way you see relationships, connection, and emotional strength forever. See, most people think love looks obvious. They think if someone loves you, they'll always move closer, communicate perfectly, and express their feelings clearly. But human beings are not robots. People carry wounds. People carry survival patterns. And an avoidant person, they learned somewhere in life that closeness can be dangerous. That dependence creates pain. That vulnerability can lead to loss, rejection, or betrayal. So the moment love becomes real, the moment emotions become deep, something inside them panics. And here's the crazy part. The more they care, the more intense the fear can become. That's why sometimes the person who seems emotionally distant is actually emotionally overwhelmed. When an avoidant suddenly becomes inconsistent, when they disappear after moments of intimacy, when they act confusing after things were going beautifully, most people react emotionally. They chase harder. They beg for clarity. They demand reassurance. But pressure does not heal fear. Pressure amplifies it. You must understand this principle. Every human behavior serves a purpose. Every action meets a need. Even unhealthy patterns are attempts to protect the self. An avoidant person is often trying to protect themselves from emotional exposure. They fear losing themselves in love. They fear disappointment. They fear needing someone too much. So instead of leaning into connection, they create distance to regain a sense of control. But here's what people miss. Distance does not always mean they want you gone. Sometimes distance is the only way they know how to calm the storm happening inside them. And when an avoidant acts cold while secretly keeping tabs on you, when they withdraw but still find excuses, to stay connected, when they become defensive anytime you talk about leaving, when they struggle to express love directly but show it indirectly through small actions, those are often signs of someone terrified of abandonment while simultaneously terrified of intimacy. It's an internal war. Part of them wants connection desperately. Another part wants emotional safety at all costs. And if you personalize every behavior, you'll suffer unnecessarily, because their reaction is not always a reflection of your worth. Sometimes it's a reflection of their unresolved fear. Now listen carefully, because this part can transform your life. You cannot heal an avoidant person by abandoning yourself. You cannot create deep love through desperation. The moment you start chasing validation, sacrificing your peace, or trying to earn someone's love, you lose your center. And relationships only thrive when both people bring emotional wholeness, not emotional survival. Your power comes from grounded certainty. When you know your value, you stop reacting to every emotional wave. You stop interpreting temporary distance as permanent rejection. You stop collapsing every time someone struggles emotionally. Lie. Instead, you become calm, strong, compassionate, clear, and that energy changes everything. Because avoidant individuals often expect abandonment, chaos, or emotional control. They expect relationships to become suffocating. They expect love to cost freedom. But when they encounter someone emotionally secure, someone who communicates honestly without losing themselves, it disrupts their entire pattern. Strength is not controlling another person. Strength is mastering your own emotional state. And that's why the deepest relationships are built through emotional safety, not emotional pressure. Now let's go deeper. Sometimes an avoidant acts irritated over small things. Sometimes they suddenly become hyper-independent. Sometimes they say they need space right after moments of closeness. Most people interpret this as proof the relationship is dying. Not always. Sometimes closeness activates buried fears they don't even consciously understand. Intimacy can trigger old emotional memories stored in the nervous system. So their instinct becomes retreat, disconnect, regain control. But here's the paradox. The very thing they pull away from is often the thing they deeply desire. Connect.
Tion, love,
Security. Belonging. And if you observe carefully, you'll notice their actions often contradict their words. They may say, "I don't need anyone," while constantly checking whether you're still there. They may act detached while quietly fearing your absence. They may struggle to say, "I love you," but panic at the thought of losing you. Why? Because human beings communicate emotionally long before they communicate verbally. Behavior reveals what words hide. But this is where wisdom matters. Understanding someone's fear does not mean tolerating disrespect. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Love does not require you to abandon your dignity. Real connection requires two people willing to grow. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling unhealthy patterns while still remaining compassionate. See, many people think love means saving someone. Love means inspiring growth through truth, presence, and emotional integrity. You are not here to fix broken people. You are here to become whole within yourself. And ironically, that wholeness creates the safest environment for authentic love to emerge. Because when you stop operating from February, you stop feeding fearful dynamics. You stop chasing. You stop forcing. You stop begging to be chosen. And suddenly, your presence carries peace instead of pressure. That changes everything. The strongest relationships are not built between two perfect people. They are built between two people willing to face themselves honestly. An avoidant person who becomes self-aware can transform completely. But transformation only happens when fear is acknowledged instead of hidden behind pride, distance, or emotional walls. And the same is true for you. Your healing begins the moment you stop measuring your worth by someone else's ability to receive love. You are valuable even when misunderstood. You are worthy even when someone struggles emotionally. You are enough even when another person is fighting battles inside themselves. Never forget that. Because the moment you truly embody that truth, you stop operating from emotional scarcity. And when scarcity disappears, love becomes cleaner, healthier, and more powerful. So if someone acts distant while quietly showing signs they don't want to lose you, don't immediately react with panic. Observe with wisdom. Respond with strength. Communica. With clarity. Maintain your boundaries. And most importantly, remain anchored in your own value. Because real power in relationships is not about making someone stay. It's about becoming the kind of person who never has to betray themselves to be loved. One of the biggest misunderstandings in relationships is believing that distance always means disinterest. Most people see someone pulling away emotionally and immediately assume they don't care about me anymore. But human psychology is far more complex than that. Sometimes the person creating the most distance is actually the person feeling the deepest emotional intensity. Especially with avoidant personalities, love can feel overwhelming instead of comforting. Closeness can trigger fear instead of peace. And if you don't understand this dynamic, you'll misread their behavior completely. Avoidant individuals often learn very early in life that emotional dependence was unsafe. Maybe vulnerability was ignored. Maybe affection was inconsistent. Maybe expressing needs led to disappointment, shame, rejection, or emotional pain. Over time, the mind adapts. It creates protective patterns designed to prevent future hurt. One of those, C patterns, is emotional withdrawal. Instead of moving closer when feelings deepen, they instinctively create space to regain a sense of control. This is why an avoidant person may seem warm, connected, and emotionally available one moment, then suddenly distant the next. To the outside world, it looks confusing, but internally, they are experiencing emotional overload. The connection feels powerful, unfamiliar, and risky. And because they associate vulnerability with potential pain, their nervous system reacts as if closeness itself is dangerous. The important thing to understand is that avoidance is usually not rooted in a lack of feeling. In many cases, it's rooted in fear of feeling too much. That distinction changes everything. Most people think love naturally creates security, but for someone with avoidant tendencies, love can activate anxiety. The more attached they become, the more they fear losing themselves, being controlled, becoming dependent, or eventually getting hurt. So the mind creates distance as a defense mechanism. Pulling away becomes a strategy for emotional survival. That's why you'll often notice contradictions in their behavior. They may crave connection, eply, but struggle to sustain intimacy consistently. They may miss you intensely while convincing themselves they need space. They may care about you profoundly while acting emotionally detached. To someone who doesn't understand avoidance, these mixed signals feel manipulative or dishonest. But many times the avoidant person is fighting an internal battle they don't fully understand themselves. And here's where relationships often become destructive. One person moves closer seeking reassurance, while the avoidant person pulls away seeking safety. The more one pursues, the more the other withdraws. Both people are usually acting from fear, not wisdom. One fears abandonment, the other fears engulfment. And unless someone becomes emotionally aware, the cycle repeats endlessly. Real emotional intelligence means learning not to personalize every reaction. An avoidant person's withdrawal is often about their relationship with vulnerability, not a reflection of your worth. That doesn't mean unhealthy behavior should be excused, but it does mean understanding the deeper emotional reality beneath the surface. When someone has spent years building emotional walls, intimacy can feel destable. They may need time to process feelings internally before expressing them outwardly. Silence becomes their way of regulating emotions. Independence becomes their way of feeling safe. Distance becomes their attempt to avoid emotional chaos. Ironically, many avoidant people desperately want love. They want connection. They want stability. But they also fear the exposure that real intimacy requires. So they live in contradiction, longing for closeness while resisting it at the same time. This is why patience and emotional strength matter so much in relationships. Not patience that tolerates disrespect or self-abandonment, but patience rooted in understanding. Strong people do not immediately collapse when someone else struggles emotionally. They remain grounded. They communicate clearly. They maintain boundaries while refusing to react impulsively to fear-driven behavior. Because true connection is not built through pressure. It's built through emotional safety. And emotional safety is created when someone feels accepted without feeling trapped, loved without being controlled, and understood without being judged. That kind of energy lowers defenses. It allows fear to soften. It could. Reach room for trust to grow naturally instead of being forced. The truth is, avoidant behavior is often a silent expression of emotional conflict. Part of them wants love deeply. Another part fears what love might cost. And until that inner conflict is healed, their actions may continue to appear inconsistent. But when awareness enters the situation, transformation becomes possible. Because people can learn new emotional patterns. Walls can come down. Fear can be replaced with trust. And someone who once ran from closeness can eventually learn that love was never the enemy in the first place. One of the most emotionally confusing experiences in relationships is dealing with mixed signals. One day, someone seems deeply connected, affectionate, and emotionally invested, and the next day they become distant, quiet, or emotionally unavailable. Most people interpret this inconsistency as manipulation, lack of care, or loss of interest. But in many avoidant dynamics, these behaviors are often silent cries for reassurance and emotional safety rather than proof that feelings have disappeared. Human beings communicate far more through behavior than words. And when someone struggles with emotions, emotional vulnerability, their actions can become contradictory. An avoidant person may deeply care about someone while simultaneously fearing the intensity of that connection. So instead of expressing fear openly, they unconsciously express it through inconsistency. This is what makes avoidant behavior so difficult to understand. Their withdrawal is not always about wanting less connection. Sometimes it's about being overwhelmed by how much the connection means to them. When emotions become too intense, avoidant individuals often experience an internal alarm system activating inside them. Closeness begins to feel emotionally risky. Their minds start searching for ways to regain control and reduce vulnerability. Instead of saying, "I'm scared of getting hurt," they may become cold, distracted, overly independent, or emotionally hard to reach. The tragedy is that most partners respond to this behavior with panic. They chase harder, demand clarity, seek constant reassurance, or react emotionally. But pressure often intensifies avoidance. The more the avoidant person feels emotionally cornered, the stronger their instinct becomes to retreat further. Underneath many avoidant behaviors is a deep fear of emotional dependence. They fear needing someone too much because dependence feels dangerous to them. Somewhere in life, they learned that vulnerability could lead to pain, disappointment, rejection, or loss. So even when they genuinely love someone, their nervous system interprets intimacy as a potential threat. This creates a painful contradiction. They want love, but fear surrendering to it. They want connection, but fear losing emotional control. They want closeness, but become uncomfortable when intimacy becomes too real. And because many avoidant individuals struggle to verbalize vulnerable emotions directly, they communicate indirectly instead. Their mixed signals often become hidden attempts to test emotional safety. For example, they may pull away emotionally to see whether you will abandon them. They may act distant while secretly hoping you will remain calm and consistent. They may avoid difficult conversations because confrontation feels emotionally overwhelming. They may minimize their feelings outwardly while internally thinking about the relationship constantly. To someone who does not understand emotional avoidance, this behavior feels irrational. But emotionally wounded people often protect themselves in irrational ways. Survival patterns are rarely logical. They are emotional defenses developed over years of pain, disappointment, or unmet needs. This is why emotional maturity is so important in relationships. Mature love looks beyond surface reactions and tries to understand the emotional reality underneath behavior. It recognizes that fear often disguises itself as indifference. Silence can hide vulnerability. Distance can hide emotional overwhelm. But understanding someone's fear does not mean abandoning your own needs. Healthy relationships require both compassion and boundaries. You can empathize with someone's emotional struggle without losing your self-respect in the process. That balance is powerful, because when you remain emotionally grounded, you stop reacting impulsively to inconsistency. You stop interpreting every withdrawal as proof you are unworthy. You stop begging for validation. Instead, you communicate calmly, maintain your standards, and allow space for emotional honesty to develop naturally. And something remarkable happens when an avoidant person encounters emotional steadiness instead of emotional chaos. Their nervous system slowly begins to relax. Defenses soften. Trust grows. Why? Because safety is not created through pressure. Safety is created through consistency, patience, honesty, and emotional control. Many avoidant people secretly expect relationships to become suffocating, dramatic, or emotionally demanding. They expect criticism, guilt, or abandonment. So when someone responds with calm confidence instead of desperation, it challenges their entire belief system about love. This does not mean every avoidant person will suddenly transform overnight. Real healing requires self-awareness and willingness to grow. But emotionally secure energy creates the possibility for deeper connection in ways emotional chasing never will. The truth is, mixed signals often reveal an inner battle taking place inside someone. Part of them is trying to move closer. Another part is trying to protect itself from pain. And until those two parts become reconciled, their behavior may continue to fluctuate between intimacy and distance. That is why wisdom in relationships requires discernment instead of immediate emotional reaction. Sometimes what appears to be emotional rejection is actually onal fear wearing a mask, and when you understand that, you stop seeing love only through words. You begin seeing the silent emotional language hidden beneath behavior itself. One of the most painful realities in relationships is that some people expect abandonment long before it actually happens. They walk into love already bracing themselves for loss. And avoidant individuals often carry this hidden expectation deep inside their emotional world. Even when they care deeply about someone, a part of them quietly wonders, what if they leave me? But instead of expressing this fear openly, they protect themselves by creating emotional distance first. This is why avoidant people sometimes test relationships without even realizing they are doing it. Their behavior can become a subconscious attempt to answer one question. Will you still stay if I stop pretending to be perfect? Will you stay if I become emotionally difficult? Will you stay when I pull away? To most people, these tests feel confusing and exhausting. One moment the avoidant person seems invested and connected, and the next moment they become cold, distracted, or detached. Sometimes they take longer to respond. Sometimes they disappear emotionally after intimacy. Sometimes they create unnecessary space after moments that should have brought two people closer together. And beneath all of it is fear. Fear of being hurt. Fear of becoming emotionally dependent. Fear of trusting someone completely only to end up disappointed or abandoned in the end. The human mind is always trying to avoid pain. And when someone has experienced emotional wounds in the past, they often create defensive patterns designed to protect themselves from future heartbreak. An avoidant person may unconsciously think, if I create distance first, maybe it won't hurt as much if they leave. Or if I never fully open up, I'll stay emotionally safe. But the tragedy is that these protective strategies often create the exact outcome they fear most. When someone constantly tests a relationship through emotional withdrawal, inconsistency, or avoidance, the other person eventually feels confused, rejected, or emotionally exhausted. Misunderstandings grow, communication breaks down, distance increases. And what began as fear of abandonment slowly turns into self-sabotage. This is why emotional awareness matters so much, because many avoidant individuals are not intentionally trying to hurt others. They are trying to protect themselves from pain they never fully healed from. You have to understand something powerful about human behavior. People often recreate the emotional environments they are familiar with, even when those environments are painful. If inconsistency, emotional distance, or instability were normalized early in life, then healthy intimacy can feel unfamiliar and uncomfortable later on. So when love becomes steady, genuine, and emotionally available, the avoidant person may become suspicious instead of relaxed. Part of them starts waiting for disappointment. They expect the connection to eventually fall apart. And because they fear being blindsided emotionally, they may start pulling away first as a form of self-protection. This is why they sometimes test whether you will leave. Not because they want distance permanently, but because they are trying to measure how safe the connection truly is. Will you explode emotionally when they struggle? Will you shame them for needing space? Will you abandon them the moment things become difficult? These questions often exist beneath the surface, even if they are. I never spoke out loud, And here's where many relationships become trapped in unhealthy cycles. The more the avoidant person tests the relationship, the more insecure the other person becomes. Then the anxious partner starts chasing reassurance, demanding closeness, or reacting emotionally. That pressure confirms the avoidant person's fear that relationships are emotionally overwhelming, so they withdraw even more. Both people end up acting from fear instead of understanding. But emotionally secure people break this cycle differently. They do not abandon themselves trying to prove their worth. They do not panic every time someone becomes emotionally inconsistent. They observe behavior carefully, communicate honestly, and maintain healthy boundaries without becoming reactive. That emotional steadiness is incredibly powerful because it creates something avoidant individuals rarely experience: safe connection without emotional chaos. A secure person does not say, "I'll tolerate anything just so you won't leave me." They say, "I understand fear, but I also value honesty, respect, and emotional growth." That balance changes relationships because true healing never comes from onal games, manipulation, or endless reassurance seeking. Healing comes when someone slowly realizes they no longer need to test love in order to feel safe inside it. And that realization can be life-changing. When an avoidant person begins trusting that closeness does not automatically lead to pain, their defenses slowly soften. The walls become less necessary. Vulnerability becomes less terrifying. Emotional honesty becomes possible, but none of that transformation happens through force. It happens through self-awareness, patience, emotional responsibility, and consistent safety over time. At the core of many avoidant behaviors is not a lack of love, but fear of losing it. And until that fear is faced honestly, they may continue pushing away the very connection they secretly hope will stay. Most people believe strength in relationships comes from holding on tightly, fighting harder, proving their love, or refusing to let someone go. But real emotional strength is something far deeper than control, pressure, or desperation. Real strength is the ability to remain grounded in your value even when emotions become uncertain. It is the ability to love someone without losing yourself in the process. And nowhere is this more important than in relationships involving avoidant dynamics. When someone becomes emotionally distant, inconsistent, or hard to read, insecurity can quickly take over. The mind starts creating fearful stories. Maybe I'm not enough. Maybe they're losing feelings. Maybe I need to do more to make them stay. And the moment fear takes control, many people begin abandoning their own emotional center. They chase reassurance obsessively. They overanalyze every message. They sacrifice boundaries just to maintain connection. But chasing emotional certainty through another person never creates lasting peace. It creates dependency. True certainty must come from within. This is one of the greatest lessons anyone can learn in relationships. Your worth cannot depend on someone else's emotional consistency. Because the moment your identity becomes attached to another person's behavior, you lose your emotional freedom. Their mood controls your peace. Their distance controls your confidence. Their uncertainty controls your sense of value. That is not love. That is emotional survival. Healthy relationships are built when two people bring emotional stability, why into the connection rather than demanding the relationship fix their internal insecurity. And this becomes especially important when dealing with avoidant individuals, because emotional pressure often pushes them further away instead of creating closeness. An avoidant person is highly sensitive to feeling controlled, trapped, or emotionally overwhelmed. So when someone reacts to their distance with panic, guilt, accusations, or constant demands for reassurance, the avoidant nervous system interprets that as danger. Their instinct becomes escape. But emotional certainty changes the entire dynamic. When you know who you are, you stop reacting impulsively to fear. You stop collapsing every time someone needs space. You stop viewing temporary emotional distance as proof of rejection. Instead, you respond with calmness, clarity, and self-respect. That energy is powerful because emotionally grounded people create safety rather than chaos. They communicate honestly without attacking. They express needs without begging. They maintain standards without trying to control another person. They understand that love should add to their life, not become the source of their identity. And this where many relationships either heal or break apart because people who lack inner certainty often try to force closeness. They believe more pressure will create more connection. But genuine intimacy cannot be forced. Real love grows where emotional safety exists. Think about it. When someone feels judged, controlled, or emotionally cornered, their walls rise higher. But when someone feels respected, understood, and emotionally safe, defenses naturally soften over time. This is why emotionally secure people are so magnetic. Their energy says, I care deeply, but I will not abandon myself. They do not operate from fear of loss. They operate from self-respect and emotional maturity. And that kind of strength transforms relationships. Because avoidant individuals are often expecting instability. They expect emotional explosions, guilt trips, pressure, or manipulation. Many have spent years associating closeness with emotional exhaustion. So when they encounter someone who remains calm under uncertainty, it disrupts their entire emotional pattern. Suddenly, love feels less threatening. Suddenly, connection feels safer. Suddenly, they begin realizing that intimacy does not have to mean losing freedom or emotional control. But here is something important. Emotional certainty does not mean becoming emotionally detached or pretending not to care. It means caring without becoming consumed. It means remaining connected to your own peace, regardless of another person's temporary emotional state. That is true power. Because the strongest people in relationships are not the ones who control others emotionally. They are the ones who control themselves emotionally. They know when to speak and when to stay calm. They know when to offer compassion and when to enforce boundaries. They know the difference between supporting someone and rescuing someone. And most importantly, they never reduce their value in order to keep someone close. This kind of strength changes the entire atmosphere of a relationship. It removes emotional desperation and replaces it with grounded confidence. It creates room for honest communication instead of emotional games. It allows connection to grow naturally rather than through fear-driven attachment. And ironically, when you stop chasing love from a place of fear, you often become far more attractive emotionally. Why? Because secure energy feels so it feels peaceful. It feels trustworthy. People are drawn toward those who remain centered within themselves. Because at the deepest level, everyone is searching for a love that feels stable, safe, and emotionally free from chaos. And that kind of love can only exist when both people learn that true certainty begins within, not outside of themselves. Healing an avoidant relationship dynamic requires something most people struggle to practice consistently: compassion without self-abandonment. Many people move to extremes. They either become overly accommodating, sacrificing their needs to keep the connection alive, or they become cold and reactive, punishing the other person for their emotional inconsistency. But real transformation happens in the middle ground where understanding and boundaries exist together. An avoidant person is often carrying invisible emotional fear beneath their behavior. Their distance is usually not random. Their hesitation around intimacy is not always lack of care. In many cases, they learn to associate emotional closeness with pain, disappointment, pressure, or loss of independence. So even when they genuinely want connection, their nervous system resists vulnerability automatically. But understanding someone's fear does not mean accepting unhealthy behavior endlessly. This is where many people become trapped in painful cycles. They confuse empathy with overtolerance. They believe loving someone means endlessly waiting, fixing, rescuing, or excusing emotional unavailability. Slowly, they lose themselves trying to save the relationship. That is not healthy love. Love should never require the destruction of your peace, dignity, or emotional stability. The truth is, healing an avoidant dynamic requires both people to grow. One person cannot carry the entire emotional responsibility of the relationship alone. Compassion matters, but accountability matters too. Because without accountability, unhealthy patterns continue repeating. An avoidant person may need patience and emotional safety, but they also need honesty. They need opportunities to recognize how their withdrawal affects the relationship. They need space to become aware of their emotional defenses instead of remaining trapped inside them unconsciously. And you, on the other hand, must learn how to stay emotionally grounded while interacting with their fear. That means learning not to chase every time they withdraw. It means resisting the urge to prove your worth constantly. It means understanding that another person's emotional struggles are not a measurement of your value. This changes everything because the moment you stop operating from fear, the relationship dynamic shifts. Instead of reacting impulsively, you begin responding intentionally. You communicate clearly instead of emotionally exploding. You create boundaries instead of emotional ultimatums. You stop trying to force closeness and instead allow honesty to emerge naturally. Healthy boundaries are especially important in avoidant dynamics because boundaries create emotional clarity. They communicate self-respect. They prevent resentment from building silently over time. Many people misunderstand boundaries. They think boundaries are punishments or threats. They are not. Boundaries are expressions of emotional truth. They say, I care about you, but I also care about myself. They protect emotional well-being while still leaving room for connection. Without boundaries, relationships become emotionally chaotic. When someone constantly ignores their own needs to accommodate another person. On's fears, resentment eventually replaces love. Emotional exhaustion replaces connection, and over time the relationship becomes built on imbalance rather than mutual growth. That's why self-worth is so critical. The stronger your relationship with yourself becomes, the less likely you are to tolerate unhealthy patterns out of fear of losing someone. You stop begging for consistency. You stop shrinking yourself to avoid conflict. You stop accepting crumbs while hoping they eventually turn into emotional security. Instead, you begin approaching relationships from wholeness instead of desperation. And this energy is transformative because emotionally secure people create environments where honesty feels safer than performance. They don't pressure others into vulnerability, but they also don't abandon their standards to maintain connection. They remain compassionate while staying rooted in self-respect. This balance often becomes deeply healing for avoidant individuals because many of them expect relationships to become emotionally overwhelming or controlling. They expect rejection, criticism, or emotional instability. But when they experience calm communication paired with healthy boundaries, it challenges those old emotional beliefs. For perhaps the first time, connection feels safe without feeling suffocating. And that safety creates the possibility for real emotional growth. But healing still requires willingness from both people. An avoidant individual must eventually become honest about their fears instead of constantly escaping them. They must learn that vulnerability is not weakness. They must recognize that emotional intimacy requires openness, communication, and consistency over time. And equally important, you must remember that your purpose is not to rescue another person from themselves. You are not responsible for fixing someone who refuses to grow. You are responsible for protecting your peace, honoring your needs, and showing up authentically in love, because the healthiest relationships are not built through emotional chasing or silent suffering. They are built when two people are willing to face their fears honestly while still respecting each other's humanity. And when compassion and boundaries finally exist together, love stops feeling like emotional survival. It becomes something far more powerful, safe, honest, balanced, and deeply formative for both people involved. So remember this. When an avoidant person acts distant, inconsistent, or emotionally conflicted, it does not always mean they want to lose you. Sometimes their behavior is the language of fear, not the absence of love. But your greatest responsibility is not to chase someone endlessly. It is to remain anchored in your own worth while creating space for honest connection. Real love is not built through pressure, emotional games, or self-sacrifice. It is built through understanding, emotional courage, healthy boundaries, and the willingness to heal old wounds instead of repeating them. And the moment you stop abandoning yourself to keep someone else close, you step into a new level of emotional power, peace, and freedom. Thank you for being here, for opening your heart, and for allowing these words to speak to the deeper part of your spirit. Never forget, you are worthy of love that feels safe, honest, and genuine. Keep growing, keep believing in your value, and keep choosing relationships that bring out the strongest version of who you are. Until next time, take care of your heart, protect your peace, and continue becoming the person you were truly meant to be. Goodbye, and God bless you.